Greetings. Just wanted to come out with another quick video with some relevance to One West history. To set this up, a week ago I appeared on Vocab Malone's channel to discuss the recently discovered book that was written by Edward Meredith Bibbins, or Abba Bivens, back in 1950, titled Marks of a Lost Race. And there was a response video, or perhaps we could call it a review, by Tahar, the leader of Great Millstone, on his DontTakeTheCharagma account. And I'll share links in the video descriptions of the two videos that I reference here. But at one point, Tahar mentioned another book, which he said was written by Abba Bivens. Here, listen to this.
The only book that I know of that Abba Bivens wrote, what was it called? Change of Worlds. This book, they're saying that Marks of the Lost Race was written, I believe, in 1950, he said.
Okay, admittedly, that was a very brief clip, but it was nonetheless relevant because Tahar makes that passing reference to another book attributed to Abba Bivens, at least by himself, titled Change of Worlds. And he mentioned it again a few days later when Sicarii was discussing the book Marks of a Lost Race. Tahar was in the live chat, again using that same account, DontTakeTheCharagma, and they read a few of his comments live on air, in which, you know, he mentions this other book, Change of Worlds. So I'll just play the relevant clips, and I'll also put the comments from the live chat on the screen. Here, listen to this.
But my point, go ahead, Slakia. You're right.
Said he wrote another book.
I heard you referencing that. What's the book called? Did he say the name?
Change of Worlds.
A Change of Worlds. Do you think Yeshaya got that book? That's the question I got for Tahar. Do you think, Elder Apostle, or do you think Yeshaya probably has that book? I almost guarantee you, and I said earlier, I bet my bottom dollar Yeshaya got these books, right? But the point, did Elder Apostle say anything else?
He said he doesn't know if Yeshaya has it, and he does not have it either.
I'm just, if anybody knowing Yeshaya, he's probably hoarding a lot of stuff. But go ahead.
It says,
Well, as luck would have it, I'm happy to report that we found a copy of this book as well. However, the authorship is not explicitly attributed to Abba Bivens. Rather, the co-authors are listed as Masha, Arya, and Yaiquab, and a copy is at one of the libraries associated with Michigan State University. And here is the relevant work. You'll notice that right on the front, it has the tribes chart. And you'll also notice that it has this interesting artwork below. Another thing worthy of note, it was written at a time when the school was called the Israeli School of Universal Practical Knowledge. I would again like to point out that it's Israeli school, not Israelite school, because this dates to a time when the school was less hostile to the word Israeli. You know, a number of Israelites have come to take on the idea that the word Israeli is, refers to something inauthentic. However, it is a biblical Hebrew term. But whatever the case, I just thought it was worthy of note that it was called the Israeli School of Universal Practical Knowledge at the time this book came out. And while an explicit date is not on this book either, just like an explicit date was not on Marks of a Lost World, it seems to me that the book is likely written in the early 80s. And when you open the book to the inside cover, which I guess might be considered the first page, the authorship is attributed to Masha, Arya, and Yaiquab. As I went through this book, I did not find any reference to Bibbins, and so therefore it's interesting that Tahar remembers it as being written by Bibbins, and his memory is justified because at least half, well, let's say maybe 40% of this book uses material from Marks of a Lost Race. For example, here's a comparison of the opening pages of each book. On the left, you have Change of World, and by the way, forgive me, but I just wanted to point out that the title is Change of World, with world in the singular, not Change of Worlds. I know that's a minor point, but I just want to be clear about that. And then on the right, you have Bibbins' Marks of a Lost Race. As you compare the two texts, the two opening pages, you'll see the text is basically identical, save for the fact that the authorship being attributed to Masha, Arya, and Yaiquab is put on the page. Aside from that, as you go through the material from Bibbins' book, and there's about 14 pages worth, maybe arguably 18 pages worth, it's only slightly changed. A word is changed here, a word is changed there, and I'll show a few examples. And then also occasionally they'll add notes referencing additional verses, which Bibbins didn't reference. So, in a sense, it could be said that Change of World is a later redaction of Marks of a Lost Race. Now, I want to be careful to note as a disclaimer that I don't mean that in any sort of nefarious sense. Some of the changes that were made may have been made by Bibbins himself before he passed, and then changes continue to be made, and then we get this redaction in the 80s. And by the way, we can date it to the 80s because it references a number of newspaper articles from the late 70s, from 1976, 1979, etc. Here's an example of some of the small changes that are made to Bibbins' text. This paragraph is from page 6 of Bibbins' book, Marks of a Lost Race, and now compare it to the same paragraph, which begins at the end of page 2 and continues on to the top of page 3 of Change of World. Now you'll notice the two paragraphs are identical, save for towards the very end, where Bibbins' book simply refers to quote-unquote Negroes, while Change of World refers to, quote, Negroes, Puerto Ricans, and Indians, end quote. Now, again, the reason I wanted to offer that disclaimer that I'm not saying that these changes were made in some sort of a nefarious way, because Bibbins himself had the tribes chart apparently before he passed, so this particular change to the text may have occurred, he himself may have been revising his work over time, and so this may be an example of a revision that he introduced, or if it was introduced to the text after he passed, it nonetheless reflected his own beliefs at some point towards the end of his life. Another change that happens is in the various places where Bibbins' book refers to Jesus as Joshua, Change of World instead refers to him as either the Son or the Son of God, or simply as Christ. For example, consider this paragraph, which begins when Joshua, which was called Christ, came preaching. Change of World reads when God's Son, called Christ, came preaching. Now, worthy of note, I didn't see any part of the book in which Jesus is referred to as Yahushai. However, that does not mean that One West had not yet adopted that name, as clearly they have their own Lashawan Kodash names. For example, you have Masha instead of Moshe, you have Ariyah instead of Ari, and Yaquab instead of Jacob. But nonetheless, Yahushai, the name Yahushai doesn't appear anywhere in Change of World as far as I could see. And I'm guessing that's because this book was, made in a sense for popular consumption, and I guess they were treating the name Yahushai as, something which, popular masses might not be ready for right out the gate. That's my guess on that. Whatever the case, as I alluded to earlier, Change of World, the first 14 pages of Change of World basically reproduce the first 18 pages of Marks of a Lost Race, with small changes here and there. Interestingly, the portion from Marks of a Lost Race stop right in the middle of Bibbins' breakdown of Deuteronomy 28. The quoted material, the portions taken from Marks of a Lost Race, don't finish the breakdown of Deuteronomy 28, nor does it contain any of the subsequent material that appeared thereafter. However, there is some overlap with what's discussed. The red line that you see on the screen marks the point where the material from Marks of a Lost Race ceases. I'm going to close this video out in a moment, but I guess I could scroll through and show you the pages which come after the portions which use portions from Marks of a Lost Race. A lot of it is just a discussion on history, references to One West, and so forth, and a quoting of articles. You'll notice here's another portion where, much like the cover, they go through the tribes chart. That's on page 16, and one thing that I found interesting, it comes up on page 19, which I'm about to show you here. On page 19, there's a statement here that says, well, this helps us to date their adoption of reincarnation, but it's worded interestingly. Starting at the top of what you see on your screen, it says, we must always think of our children as being us, because they are us, coming back in the reincarnation. Now, I know that One Westers who affirm reincarnation say that you are reincarnated within your father's line, but I found the wording of this somewhat interesting, because now maybe it was, one could say that it was written in a way that didn't convey what they meant, but if taken at face value, it seems to be open to the interpretation that even your own immediate children are you in the reincarnation, which, if taken literally, would seem to imply that, you know, you could be existing in two bodies at the same time. Whatever the case, also interesting, at the bottom of page 19 and continuing on to page 20, it says, if you are the seed of Israel, if you are of the seed of Israel, you must make, if you're of the seed of Israel, you must make every effort to get your name registered in the Lamb's Book of God, which book we have. I thought that was interesting. That seems to be mildly analogous to One West teaching that they are the gate to heaven and stuff like that. You know, the only school with the truth. That's the way I'm interpreting that. I thought that was quite interesting. There's a number of other interesting things here. For example, at the bottom of page 20, they quote, towards the top, they say this is an article on of the undertaking of the Israeli school, and however, it doesn't say where this article is found. There's at least 3 articles that are quoted in this book in the pages after the portions which come from Marks of a Lost Race. There's 3 different articles, another one from the New York Post, and another one is the review, the Wall Street Journal's review of Arthur Kessler's book, The 13th Tribe, also appears in here, or at least a paraphrase of it. So, as I said, at least 3 articles are referenced, but this is the only one that doesn't explicitly mention its source. But nonetheless, it's interesting. And I was unable to find this article so far, but we'll see. I'll certainly share it if I do find it in the future. But just scrolling through, and we'll make our way to the end. Like I said, it's a small booklet. It's only about 34 or 35 pages. Well, here's another example. This is on page 24 of one of the other articles they reference. This is from the New York Post in 1979. This is what allows us to date the book to maybe the early 80s. And it quotes a gentleman who, at the very least, was hostile to Christianity. And then if we go to page 26, you see it begins, this article of the Wall Street Journal was edited by Edmund Fuller, and this is Edmund Fuller's review of Arthur Kessler's the 13th Tribe. Although it's not exactly a quote from the article, it's more of a paraphrase of key points from the article, but nonetheless it's interesting, so that also makes a part of the book. Moving on, towards the end, there's an interesting point about teachings. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. This is on page 31. It says as follows. It says, I'm guessing possibly that this portion may have been written by Peter Sherrod because of the way it's written in the first person. It says, P.S. If you send to me 5 90-minute cassette tapes, I will send to you 6 hours of educational work of speaking in New York, Times Square, and broadcasting on the radio in Cleveland, Ohio, and things we did in the past in the churches to try to convert our people back to themselves. If you send to me in a money order in the amount of $15, I will send you 6 hours programming on tapes. Phone for information, Peter Sherrod, and then it gives the phone number and the P.O. box that One West also used throughout the 90s, if I'm not mistaken. And that pretty much covers what I wanted to cover in this video. Others can peruse this book at their leisure. I'm sure it'll be made available soon. As I said, it's a short book, only about 34, 35 pages, close to half of which is the first 18 pages out of Bibbins' book, Marks of a Lost Race, and then afterwards you have these subsequent additions and references to the school and references to various articles that they see as relevant. So that's all. Just wanted to cover this interesting work. I hope you found this interesting, and hopefully I'll have more to share. I may discuss this on Vocab's channel as well. As always, I look forward to the comments of others. God bless.